Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day, wherever you're chiming in from. We're having the first roundtable today. The roundtable about cross-chain DeFi revolution and what is coming up in the future. I'm Ben from Parity, working in the ecosystem development team, and I'm joined by amazing panelists today to kick this off. While starting out, let's start out with a round of introductions and see who you are, what team you're working on, and then dive into the cross-chain DeFi. Let's see who's going first. From my side, Luke, are you happy to go first in the round of introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. My name is Luke Youngblood, and I'm a contributor to Moonwell. Moonwell is an open lending and borrowing protocol on the Moonbeam parachain and on Moonriver on Kusama as well. I'm super excited to be here and talk about cross-chain DeFi today.
Nice, thank you. What about Aziz? Where are you working on?
Hey, thanks, Ben. My name is Aziz. I'm one of the core members of StellaSwap. We're actually one of the leading DEX on Moonbeam and Polkadot. Basically, we're a hybrid DEX by design. We have a standard AMM, a stable AMM, as well as a concentrated liquidity AMM. So yeah, that's just a bit about us.
Nice. Looking forward to have a discussion about that. Going random, Paul from DIA, right?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. So hi guys, my name is Paul. I'm one of the co-founders at DIA, and I'm contributing on the BT side. So DIA is a multi-chain oracle. We provide highly customizable price feeds for a vast range of assets. So I guess more or less any token you would need, but also NFT floor prices, RNG, and latest is liquid staking asset price feeds. So we don't only provide market prices, but also contract stakes. Happy to discuss this as this kind of relates to cross-chain, and it's kind of our founding thesis to have a cross-chain ecosystem empowered by our oracles. So much looking forward to speak about this later.
Yeah, we will definitely touch base on that as well. And last but not least, Harrison, would you mind to introduce you as well?
Hi, everyone. I'm Harrison. I'm a co-founder and product lead at DAM. DAM is a global liquidity infrastructure for scalably moving value between different blockchains. And DAM's first dApp, it's called D2O. It's an omni-chain stablecoin that helps blockchain scale native stablecoin liquidity, starting with Moonbeam and Ethereum. And we just announced our mainnet last week, and really happy to be here today.
Nice. Thanks, everybody. I think there's a lot of great knowledge, in-depth knowledge about DeFi in general, but as well as like in the whole cross-chain, multi-chain environment. What I would like to start out for today, I think there's a lot of rumors or a lot of talks around multi-chain deployments, cross-chain deployments, and teams and projects are aiming for one or the other. So I would like open it up for whoever wants to go first on the explanation on how do you see the difference between a cross-chain deployment or a cross-chain DeFi use case versus a multi-chain deployment, and what are very unique, maybe to the Moonbeam ecosystem, Polkadot ecosystem, or general interoperability, what we see between all the new like consensus systems that we're working on. I don't know if anybody has like want to take the first step and go first, or has an idea on how to explain it or get the users more knowledge.
Sure. I'm happy to jump in and talk about multi-chain versus cross-chain. So, in the early days of DeFi, summer 2020, 2021, what we really saw was, multi-chain world where protocols like SushiSwap, which is a large DEX, deployed across many different L1 ecosystems. This is sort of a multi-chain deployment. But the challenge there is that the liquidity was fragmented across all of those different layer one networks, because all those layer ones have different consensus requirements and consensus set, like different validators or miners. And so really that led to, the ability to use SushiSwap and protocols like that on lots of different chains, but the liquidity was fragmented. So, if you had like USD coin or some stable coin on one chain, you might have to bridge it to another. And also things like cross-chain governance were super hard because, one chain can't really govern another. And so what we're seeing in just the last year in 2022, with launch of XCM, cross-consensus messaging on Polkadot, and also some of the general message passing solutions that are available like Axelar, Wormhole, Layer 0, and others. Now we're starting to see the ability to actually pass data and messages between different chains. And so these apps that have been fragmented across this multi-chain world can now start to become cross-chain and connect to each other and talk to each other. And I think there's still some challenges with bridging that liquidity, because we do now have to use these general message passing layers to sort of pass messages between consensus sets. And there may be different security requirements, and different different networks may have maybe more centralized or less centralized than others. So there are challenges, but I do think that we're going to start to see more of these cross-chain apps where similar to like DAM on this call here, I'm sure Harrison, you could talk a bit about it, that actually exist on more than one chain and don't have to fragment the liquidity as much as these multi-chain apps have had to in the past.
Harrison, you want to pick it up from there and see like how DAM is contributing to cross-chain, to native cross-chain implementation and use cases?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I guess, so what we're really trying to do is make it easy to scale native stablecoin liquidity. So what we've done is we've developed a fault-tolerant system that sits on top of these different cross-chain messaging protocols and really prioritize resilience. So given the number of security exploits that have happened in this space with like the traditional wrapped token architecture, we wanted to introduce a model that we felt offered a significantly better security, user experience, and composability architecture. So first and foremost is, rather than using a wrap token architecture, we use a mint and burn architecture. So with us, you would mint D2O on Ethereum, and in order to move it or teleport it, we use the word teleport very deliberately, from Moonbeam, or excuse me, from Ethereum to Moonbeam, what ends up happening is essentially there's an accounting adjustment in the protocol. So the D2O that you have on Ethereum is first burned, and you send it to yourself on Moonbeam, and then it's reminted there. So it arrives as a native or canonical asset, which we think is great from a user experience perspective, because there's no confusion, right? Like, where is the asset? There's only one D2O in our instance. And that makes it a lot easier to integrate and work with other DeFi primitives, other NFT projects, and infrastructure providers, and sort of plug into that and so forth. But we also made the decision, when we looked at the landscape of the different cross-chain messaging protocols, to select ones that we felt like really prioritized resilience in connection with ensuring that messages always arrived. Because this is a nascent space, it requires new infrastructure, and for us, we need to ensure that messages arrive when you're communicating between two different blockchains. And when we were doing evaluation, the only two that we saw that really met that requirement were Hyperlane and Layer 0. So we chose them very deliberately to start to DAM in terms of building on top of, but we also just built DAM on top of those protocols, because the reality is that things go wrong. And I think it would be misguided for us to put all of our faith in any one cross-chain messaging protocol. So for resilience purposes, much like you see the high availability and disaster recovery type of architecture on traditional data centers around the world, we have a similar mechanism where DAM sits on top of those protocols. And then, of course, we can support other ones in the future as required. And then finally, that we've built a dApp called the Guardian, which is essentially matching any mints and burns that take place. So in the event that the underlying cross-chain messaging protocol that's being utilized, there's some sort of illicit message that takes place, essentially the Guardian would then track, okay, that potentially has taken place, and then there would be a halt in the protocol. So I think what you're seeing now in a cross-chain world is the opportunity to build fault-tolerant systems that are more tailored to enterprise use, that essentially is able to build on some of the general purpose infrastructure today and build DeFi-specific cross-chain infrastructures like DAM.
Very nice. Very interesting. Are you like, is DAM already like, are you collaborating with StellaSwap, or does it get used into the DEX? And is there like a cross-chain use case that is specifically you guys are looking together specifically into?
So DAM's first DApp is D2O. So right now we have a number of D2O that's been teleported from Ethereum over to Moonbeam. And, we definitely are trying to work with StellaSwap and others within the Moonbeam ecosystem to make D2O a primitive in connection with not only cross-chain swaps, some of the existing primitives that exist today, but also some of the existing cross-chain DEXs that exist within the Polkadot ecosystem as well.
Nice, nice. How does this look like from a StellaSwap side, Aziz? And if we talk about cross-chain, what does a cross-chain DEX look like, or what is different to a multi-chain DEX?
Yeah, I think Luke sort of like was comprehensive in discussing about the differences between a multi-chain approach and a cross-chain approach. For us, I mean, the reason why we built on Polkadot, right, is obviously because of XEM, and obviously the EVM sort of like implementation makes it easier for us to sort of like build and port code, right? So that naturally meant that building on Moonbeam was really, really easy, right? So focusing on XCM, which is basically facilitating like interoperability, right? So that is something that opens a lot of use cases, right? Especially when one of the main issues for scalability or blockchain scalability, or even like mass adoption, right, of DeFi, is interoperability, right? The ability for all ones to communicate with each other, for assets to messages to be able to transfer with one another. So in sort of like looking at a DEX, right, in establishing a DEX, what is the most important thing for us in terms of the design principles is leveraging on these tenets of interoperability, allowing for example, internally within the Polkadot ecosystem, leveraging on XCM to facilitate tokens across other parachains to be traded on Moonbeam via us, right? So that's why we've sort of listed, assets from Interlay, from Michaela, we just recently launched a Fala network farm, right? So that is something which we wanted to do, which was be the shelling point of Polkadot, right, via XCM. Now, what we've also done in the start of the year is introduce to our users cross-chain swaps, which is something that we've worked with Squid, the amazing team at Squid and Excelor. They built Excelor being the infrastructure for GMP and Squid being the liquidity router, right? So that has tremendous success because users finally are able to transfer. It's basically a network agnostic user experience, which is much needed in DeFi because it's so complex, right? You can't expect the normal guy to come in DeFi and everything is has natural as in a user experience. So with things like with innovations like cross-chain swaps, further cross-chain utilities, imagine NFTs, cross-chain NFTs, or even staking, to Moonwell, and locking your assets on one chain and deploying in another. So those are the kinds of things that I think it's very important as a DEX to facilitate, because the most important thing for the entire industry, right, is to make things simpler. Although that is something which is known, but it's very, very hard to achieve. And that's why really excited to work with, a lot of talented projects and, the ecosystem to sort of like facilitate like true interoperability.
Nice. That sounds very exciting. Let's hop over like to Paul. How do you define or describe the difference between cross-chain and multi-chain development from Dio's perspective, or what do you see as the opportunity here?
Yeah, I mean, not much to add when it comes to the definition to what Luke very on point described. I think for us, basically, this was a journey from a multi-chain ecosystem to a cross-chain ecosystem. Also, when it comes to our infrastructure, so we early on deployed on various different chains, EVM, Rust base, whatnot. We deployed very early on Polkadot and on I guess the majority of parachains, and it was a multi-chain universe. And we're quite excited about the Polkadot ecosystem because it's kind of like this you already agreed on a common standard with XCM. So you don't have like a bunch of different consensus protocols which have different messaging protocols, and you need to figure out who's using what. So it's like this kind of nicely locked ecosystem for now, where you have agreed on a standard. And so I think we'll see probably true cross-chain use cases here first. And then our role as I guess an oracle is basically open up the doors for other ecosystems. And what does this exactly mean? So we're able to build price feeds which are ecosystem specific. So we can build price feeds which are just based on StellaSwap and other Polkadot native DEXs, and build price feeds based on these trades. But we can also bring the price feeds from other ecosystems, from potentially wrapped or messaged, so minted and burned assets from other ecosystems. So we can bring a lot of transparency in, I guess, in architecture, which becomes more and more complex over time and requires that transparency. So we hope we can provide relevant tooling to just enable more dApps and builders with having these price feeds, but also contract states available. So where we basically check, okay, what has been locked and minted in a format which is not use case specific. So and by doing so, we hope that the interconnectedness will increase, and the true utilization of capital will increase, very different to what we saw in a multi-chain universe. But I think it really requires this transparency, because otherwise you can't utilize as you want these assets.
Nice, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think so. To summarize, what I hear, like, I think there's two basic benefits in the implementation, right? It's like, on the one side, what you mentioned, Luke, is the performance, sort of like the liquidity fractionalization can be tackled, and it can be more efficient, economic efficient, most probably through cross-chain implementations, because you don't need to have this liquidity in all of these chains, and you can send it back and forth in that sense. And I think the second one is what you mentioned, Aziz, is like in the pattern is like the user experience, right? The user has all of these different functions, but he doesn't necessarily actually need to hop on all of these different chains. It can be done sort of like in the background, and the user just uses features. To summarize or go in this direction. And touching base on this, I mean, if we connect DeFi within different consensus systems, within different ecosystems, I would be interested what you guys see the most driving value from participating or playing in this different ecosystems, and how this would come together from either use case perspective from the community, like from a user, or also from sort of like the protocol efficiency side. Are there any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think I'd love to describe a little bit about how and why Moonwell community chose Polkadot and chose Moonbeam, because I think one of the things we were thinking about in terms of a cross-chain lending protocol is that we really need to think about how do liquidations happen. So if you imagine, people want to take out a loan against their crypto, but if their loan doesn't have enough collateral backing it, you need to be able to liquidate that loan to keep the system healthy, to avoid the system becoming insolvent with bad debt. And in order to do that, you really do need to be able to kind of transfer that liquidity between chains. And Polkadot with XCM gives us the ability to teleport an asset from one parachain to another. And so that allowed us in the Moonwell community to build a liquidity hub on Moonbeam, where we can bring the best parachain assets like native Tether, native DOT, other tokens from other parachains, and bring them into this liquidity hub on Moonbeam. And then all of the lending and borrowing can happen on that liquidity hub. And then liquidations can all happen on the hub as well. So it makes it very efficient, and it reduces the risk in the system for the lending protocol. Now, on the decentralized exchanges, I think they have a different set of concerns. And so the cross-chain swaps with Squid make a lot of sense. But on lending, it's really hard, just because those liquidations have to happen very quickly, and they need to happen in a way that's, you know, almost automated, where robots are doing it. And that's sort of what we've seen, you know, in the last year with all of these centralized lenders that have blown up, like Celsius and BlockFi. You know, they had humans making these decisions, and they're too slow. But the DeFi protocols, like the DeFi lending protocols like Moonwell, were very quick to liquidate, and so they didn't have some of these issues. So I think it's been really nice to be in the Polkadot universe, just because you have all the parachains kind of talking the same language with XCM, and the ability to teleport assets from any parachain to any other parachain. So that's been really nice for the Moonwell community.
That's super interesting. One point, like, to follow up, that comes to my mind is, like, you said like the speed of changing the rules, right? It's like, if you have the centralized entities, usually they have like some sort of governance process on changing the rules. How can they act on happenings? And I think we saw this last year. But then we have the decentralized way, where you have like on-chain rules, and they just can get executed defined based on communities voting. And then as soon as something happens, they get executed automatically, so you don't really have to take care of it. How much do you think the whole approach of governance, and I mean, Polkadot and Kusama has like OpenGov, the new governance system, and I know that Moonbeam has it very similar implemented. How much do you think that is like a value proposition and is important for governing these on-chain defined rules and making sure to have some sort of risk protection for the user?
I think it's actually super important, because in most L1 ecosystems, if you look across the landscape today, you actually do see that there's no governance around upgrades to the network itself, right? So when the network changes its rules around consensus, or around, you know, upgrading from one proof of stake technology to another, or something like that, which can have dramatic effects for the apps deployed on that network, there may not be a way for the community to express their opinion. You know, do they agree with that upgrade? Do they want to see those new rules changed? But I definitely appreciate in the Polkadot and Moonbeam ecosystems, how that robust on-chain governance allows the community to have a voice in those upgrades. You know, it has trade-offs, because, for example, like opening up an XCM channel to a new parachain requires governance, so it can slow things down a little bit. But at least it means the community is informed and consenting to all those changes that are made, so that it really has a nice characteristic there. And I can tell that the Parity and Web3 Foundation have put a lot of effort into that.
It's interesting.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would be interested as well. One thing is, like, as an add-on, is like, I wonder like how much it was sought and how much it gets appreciated from say like the layer 0, the parachain level, and then the dApp level. And it's a pretty much a very basic consensus that this is one of the biggest features for all of us to kind of steer the development in the right direction. But I would be super interested to hear other thoughts on governance and in the context of multi-chain or cross-chain interoperability.
I mean, maybe 2 cents here. So I think everyone agree on certain standards and on board with them, and having a governance system which allows contribution here is essential, I think, to have a common understanding, and also the will to go along that mission. And I think it's like with politics, right? So does a democracy work more efficiently than a voting dictator? Probably not. Is it the mid to long term more long lasting and solid way of governing something? For sure. And I think especially for the Polkadot ecosystem, where you basically have like an additional layer of alignment, which obviously slows down things in general. It is still the only way of how you can over time really carve out a differentiating positioning against other ecosystems. So I think, even though it's painful and people do complain, it is essential. And maybe it also is. So I think when you go to the governance within Polkadot or Polkadot related events, I think you see there's a very close community which understands what everyone is doing. And I think this is being really fostered by this very engaging governance process and makes people sticky and stay with the ecosystem. So I think it's not only on a technological, but also I think on a societal level, really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of like the concerns about speed have been addressed with OpenGov. I think we see this on Kusama right now, and I know that the Parity teams and Moonbeam is looking into having the same governance system where it just can be much faster and actually executed in parallel. I think that's hopefully addressing that. Any other thoughts from you guys?
I think as a general matter, this multi-chain narrative, what you're seeing is protocols sort of transitioning to being more like multinational corporations where there's like a global protocol and then there's shared governance, shared liquidity, shared resources and participation across the different networks that they happen to be deployed on, the different blockchains they happen to be deployed on, versus having a bunch of isolated deployments. And I think what's really compelling about this shift is it allows participants in the space to get exposure to different types of innovation and be able to participate more easily in different communities. So it's really a great step forward in terms of fostering collaboration and cross-pollination around projects that otherwise would have been isolated from one another, even within the same protocol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. We drifted a bit away into more governance and less DeFi, and I would follow up with the question we addressed it a little bit. I mean, cross-chain interoperability, all these new protocols, all these messaging formats are very new, and I would be interested on how you see the risk from your team going into building cross-chain, and what do you think on how to address them, or what do you see the biggest risk could be potentially, and how do you try to address them?
You referring to me?
Yeah, who wants to go first? Whoever has good thoughts on the risk of cross-chain.
I think, yeah, sure. No worries. As in, let me just chime in here because, here at StellaSwap, 6 months ago we experienced a sort of like the Nomad exploit, right? So we were literally at ground zero, and obviously that sort of like, created like a very important lesson for all of us, right? In terms of the actuality of bridging risk, right? And with cross-chain swaps, and obviously, the underlying infrastructure layer or cross-chain functionality, right, would be all this GMP, general message passing infrastructure, those bridges, which always has a chance of exploit. In fact, if you look at like DeFi exploits, most of, as in the majority of funds stolen are on bridges. So that is at the heart of that, right? Of the risk of cross-chain. So that's why working together, with the infrastructure layers, like Axelot, like a Wormhole, to really understand their security mechanisms, that's a very important part in the selection, right, of how we work together and implementing it to our users, right? In fact, in our grants proposal program, right, when Moonbeam opened a interim grants program where StellaSwap sort of applied for, right? One of the sort of like core elements that we had to present was the selection of the next bridge, right? And that entailed a lot of groundwork, like talking to our partners like Moonwell, stakeholders, the foundation, to gather feedback, to gather a lot of talking with each bridge to look at their security mechanisms and practices. So that was a very long process for us to get together and manifest it in a framework of selecting the bridges, right? So that was a lot of work, but it was required because what we experienced with the Nomad exploit, as in just highlighted the need for us to be really, really intense with security in totality, in a comprehensive manner, right? So on our end, when we implement functionalities like cross-chain, to some, I think it's very important for it, to just peel away the security, looking at security in the in totality, right? Not only the architectural layer, but the operational layers, to ensure that things are mitigated, and there's always sort of like ways for us to respond or contingency plans based on that.
So you're looking into different risk assertions in the different, like, sort of, what are the risk between communications between different cross consensus systems, right? Like talking from Polkadot to Ethereum versus like having the risk on interoperability within the same consensus systems, I mean like parachain to parachain communication, and then asserting what different risk these bridged assets and wrapped assets then bring into the DeFi protocol, right?
Yeah, I think it really takes when you move into this like cross-chain world, you really have to think more about defense in depth. And defense in depth is like a concept from like the security world. But the idea generally is like, if you're trying to secure a computer network, you don't necessarily just want a firewall at the edge of the network. You might want firewalls on every computer on the network. You might want multiple layers of protection. And so in the cross-chain world, you have to think about, now you're sort of exposing your protocol to the risks of every ecosystem that you're connected to in some way. And different ecosystems have different risks, whether it's like finality or consensus, things like that. And so, and then there's smart contract risk on each of those ecosystems. So one approach that is really effective, I think, that a lot of teams have built in is, like circuit breakers, right? So the idea that if, for example, we see like too much of a token minted on one chain and there's not enough backing it on another chain, we should, pause the protocol so that nothing can happen. And so the idea of circuit breakers actually have been pretty popular. A lot of central exchanges actually use this technology because, if they see like too much flowing out of their hot wallet, they can circuit break and shut down systems so they don't lose as much money. And I think this is going to become more and more necessary in the cross-chain world. But you also have to balance that risk of, you have to balance those risks and use tools like circuit breakers to kind of, be able to shut things down, but also balance the risk of censorship of messages, because it can be equally important to make sure that a message lands on a different chain, especially if the message is time sensitive. If it's something like a swap that needs to happen in a minute or so before the price moves, you want that message to be delivered very rapidly. And so there's this balance between like, censorship resistance of message passing and, like security of the system. And it's hard to kind of strike the right balance sometimes.
Yeah, let me maybe just add something to this. So we absolutely agree. So we're basically providing contract stakes across different chains, which can then be useful. You just described as the circuit breakers, and I think it's the kind of best thing to do right now. At the same time, we believe this will evolve over time, because even though it can mitigate risks, it also creates more new ones, because you might just start to see attacks which are just based on utilizing circuit breakers and then exploit something because it just does not accept new collateral or not. So we're quite excited about this, basically now breaking down all these different, logics. So so people become also more aware of what that means, because there's always a risk. But it would be great if, in the end user understands what are circuit breakers and under which conditions do they occur. So there's more transparency and people are more conscious of what additional risks, which are not so easily understandable, they might get into, and what benefits they might have.
Yeah, and I think it's general pattern of like more multi-ecosystem monitoring and sort of like alert products, right? Either directly on-chain from data feeds and stuff, but also like off-chain, having different communities who actively monitor different protocols in different ecosystems for cross-chain activity.
Absolutely. I think new data feeds like proof of reserves. So, you can prove that all the tokens exist in a lock-in contract on one chain and no more tokens have been minted on another are really key to making these protocols more safe. I'm sure you guys are building things like this at DIA as well, right? At DIA.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it is good to have a third-party attestation because you have different bridges, different messaging protocols, but basically having a different way of assessing these stakes, which is very different from the bridge or messaging protocol itself, is just an additional layer. It just doesn't even require the same security guarantees as the bridge. It's just like an auditor. Then you need to figure out what is the logic behind that makes it more secure and not possibly more attackable. But with ideally, Aziz, you said that it's there's like kind of now a due diligence of what bridge to use, and this maybe can run at some point into what we discussed, like a sort of censorship. If you just accept, let's say, wormhole and nothing else, then you're reliant on one bridge. So it's not only, I'd say, a concentration of risk, but also I think it's innovation hindering. So I guess we're like, just by nature, more interested in having this rather open and finding different ways of mitigating these risks by additional tooling around that. Because I think, I expect a huge evolution in bridges and messaging protocols to come. So we'll have very different stacks. We would like to obviously have this open to any, and then providing additional ways of having more transparency, I think is needed.
It just speaks to the importance of resilience, right? Because I think, again, if you're building a protocol and you're only relying on one cross-chain messaging protocol or one bridge, you are doing you and your entire community a disservice. So I think being able to not only mitigate in the event that one of those underlying cross-chain messaging protocols is compromised, because there are people trying to compromise it, right? How do you do that from a security perspective? I think Paul sort of alludes to a really important point too, from like a product roadmap perspective. You want to be able to have the ability to support certain types of use cases, potentially connect with certain types of networks, and that gives you really that strong flexibility. And when you're designing a system, if you have a very specific type 1 error, right? Like, this particular token must always be solvent. It must always have one-to-one collateral backing. You're able to build sort of decentralized dApps to essentially mitigate and monitor against this. So it actually increases, the amount that you can just rely on technology to sort of go to the whole, Polkadot ethos, right, of more truth and less trust.
And it actually really applies not to bridges, but to liquid staking. Liquid staking has become so popular in the last year or so. And if you think about all of the different liquid staked dot derivatives there are out there, how do you know that every dot that's liquid, every liquid stake dot minted on a given parachain actually is backed by a dot that's staked on the relay chain, right? Without a proof of reserves, you have to sort of trust them that they're not over minting. And I'm sure at some point, there will be liquid staking tokens, maybe not on Polkadot, but somewhere where they do mint too much and they're minting out of thin air. But as a purchaser or a holder of like a liquid staking token, you really just want that assurance that it's one-to-one and they're not printing money out of thin air.
Exactly. I don't want to like turn this into marketing for us, but we exactly did this with mixed spikes for Lido Stake Dot, because not only we felt there's a necessity to understand if it's collateralized, as you said, Luke, but also it's not a very highly traded asset, and it's great collateral at the same time. So it's hard to build a price feed because you only have like one or two markets for it, and it's till now infrequently traded when you compare it to the amount of TVL it has. So the combination here is I think needed. So I think we'll see a lot of contract stake attestations in the future for sure, probably starting with liquid stake derivatives, but could be bridged assets. And this will enable then also much more, I guess, more exotic and risky use cases when you add just new tooling around that. And it is also, I think, the foundation for really cross-chain use cases when you actually don't want to have the fragmentation of collateral as you had in a multi-chain universe, like the ability to understand where does something come from, is it really collateralized, and how has it been passed?
I do think an important risk to flag off associated with that as use cases in the sort of multi-chain world becomes more complex is that there are certain use cases that require that transactions have to happen within a certain period of time. And I think at this stage, unless you implement some really sophisticated with controls and you have absolute certainty that a message is going to get passed from one network to another, it can be really risky to essentially assume within your protocol, like similar to a liquidation, for example, that it's going to happen from one network to another every single time. Because in that instance, that one failed message, that one missed message, or that one message that may not have arrived in time could potentially create some vulnerabilities within an overall protocol.
That is addressing like sort of the nature of asynchronous messaging in the networks, right? Where you can't control the synchronicity of messaging getting validated or into blocks at the end of the day.
The way they've handled this in other ecosystems, this risk is by just where they use like optimistic tech is they just extend the window of time to like something really long, like 7 days, right? And you have up to 7 days to provide a fraud proof or something that proves that there's something untoward that happened. But that doesn't really, the 7-day window, and you actually need that because there have been periods of time when the Ethereum network was so congested due to NFT mints from Bored Ape Yacht Club or something that you couldn't get messages through for several hours. So you actually do need that 7-day window, but it's a very poor user experience because, people have to wait 7 days for funds to arrive across a bridge or something like that. And so I think there's better ways of handling it. Like obviously, we're sort of biased, but XCM has message passing happen so quickly, within 6 or 10 seconds or something that we're just really spoiled by having these very fast and instantly final messages that get passed on the relay chain. But I think it is a hard risk to solve. And so in the short term, the way the DeFi protocols like Moonwell have solved it is just by having all liquidations happen on a hub chain. And that way you only have to worry about, is the block production happening on the single L1? You don't have to worry about, is there congestion on some other network? And so it can de-risk that. But in order to make these applications really effective, at some point we need to have some type of, guaranteed message delivery within certain time frames. And that's a very hard problem to solve. Especially when you're dealing with various different consensus sets and consensus algorithms. Yeah,
Harrison, you were about to say something?
No, Luke covered it.
Okay, amazing. Let's switch a little bit I think we discussed a lot of sort of like the future. What trends do we see when it comes to risk assertion and risk protection? I would open it up more in the direction, sort of like what trends are you seeing for 2023 when it comes to cross-chain in relation to DeFi activities and use cases? And just generally open it for everybody. Anything that is super exciting, what trends that might appear, where is the community going?
Right now, cross-chain is relatively new, right? We just implemented, and it is sort of like a learning curve for users to sort of like understand what it is. When we look at cross-chain swaps 2 weeks ago, right? As in, there was a lot of things that we had to solve for, right? Because the user experience needed to be very easy, and Squid had a good job in sort of like creating a very good widget for users to do that. And once users experience sort of like cross-chain swaps, right? To them, that is something like mind-blowing, right? Because finally, you don't have to use like bridges. You don't have to have a lot of this complex stuff when you're trying to onboard to a new L1, right? So experiencing a cross-chain swap, I think the primitives of like cross-chain technology at the start would be, the sort of like the basic things, right? Like swap, and then like lending on borrowing, collateralizing. And this year, we're gonna go very big with of DeFi, which is what we need at this point of time, right? From to sort of like spearhead mass adoption. So I think going forward, it's all about sort of like reducing further frictions on, say, the cross-chain primitives, and then from there you look at more enhanced sort of like functionalities of cross-chain technology. There are a lot of projects are currently building on.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of.
For me, sorry. Yeah.
No, go for it.
I was gonna say for me, I see a couple big trends in 2023 that I'm very excited about. One is just cross-chain governance in general. So if you think about the way that most of these multi-chain protocols are deployed today, they typically have like, a hub chain where they started, which is like Ethereum usually, or some network like that. And then they've deployed separate isolated deployments across all these other layer 1 ecosystems. They may have a governance on the hub, but these isolated multi-chain instances are really isolated from the central governance. And so the way that you typically manage governance is you maybe do a signal vote or a snapshot vote on the hub, and then some human goes and implements the results of that vote on another chain. But obviously, we want to remove humans and human error and human mistake from the process. We want to automate governance and decentralize as much as possible. So I think we'll start to see with these general message passing layers like XCM and others, Wormhole, Axelar, Layer 0, we'll start to see this concept of like a single governance hub that can actually govern multiple cross-chain deployments. And so we'll move away from like this sort of sovereign nation thing to where, you do have that like multinational corporation thing that Harrison was describing, where you can kind of govern it from a single central location. That'll be really awesome to sort of see the cross-chain governance, improve, and to see more tooling and, more DAO tooling in that space. And then another thing that I'm really excited about for 23 is the concept of restaking. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but basically the idea is that, generally like you stake your DOT to secure the relay chain. And basically a, relay chain validator kind of promises they will not, tamper with messages in blocks. And if they do, they get slashed, right? There's a heavy penalty for being an dishonest validator, right? Restaking allows you to basically take, maybe your DOT your liquid stake DOT you've already staked on the relay chain, and then restake it in another protocol, like maybe it's a price oracle, or maybe it's some data availability solution. And now you can earn an additional yield by restaking your tokens for providing that economic security that, like if you're restaking into a price oracle, for example, you agree that you might get slashed and lose your DOT if the price oracle is dishonest. And so this allows stakers to actually choose the level of risk they want, right? They can get a higher rate of return from staking if they want to take on more risk. But it also allows the economic security of like the DOT relay chain to actually start extending to other areas, which is super interesting. Like, now I can know that there's like $1 billion or more of economic security in this price oracle. And if the price oracle lies, like they will lose some money. So there's more teeth in that. And there's going to be all kinds of interesting use cases for restaking where people can just kind of dial up the risk and the reward they want, or dial it down if you don't want to take on the additional risk and reward.
Yeah, totally. I would be super curious to see the first, say, like cross-chain governance voted protocol update. I mean, if something like that happens, very curious of something to see this.
Well,
sorry.
I think this is such a great use case because also usually if you're moving away from the base chain, you tend to have maybe small people with smaller allocations just on chains which have, let's say, like cheaper settlement cost than Ethereum. And it is kind of sad that you're excluding people who just have maybe a vote in opinion in the governance because they don't hold your tokens on the main chain, or you will kind of tax them to move them across to have a vote. And I guess with governance, we all need to work to include as many people as possible and have an opinion on what you're building. And I think using tooling really in a way to facilitate that is I think one of the most exciting use cases having a positive impact very much long term. And maybe just like one thing to add on the restaking, this falls like in my excitement category as I think probably a growth driver when we are moving beyond, okay, let's just get the tooling in order and understand what we're doing here. But it's really, I think, probably like, especially in a market where TVL is lower than it was, I don't know, a year plus ago, reutilizing this in a smart way and being able to use cross-chain capital in different ways, like being it through restaking or reprofitating already collateral, which is in, I don't know, maybe it's an index, you use this as collateral for CSD, and then you can lend against that. So really finding out across chains how you can really make the most out of collateral.
And what we're most excited about for 2023 is enterprise adoption. And, you know, when you're focusing on building these cross-chain infrastructure that meets those requirements around security, scalability, and composability, it's really exciting to see, you know, the enterprises that are coming into the space. I know we're working with many that are very interested in accessing innovations on different blockchains and are just starting to have the infrastructure required in order to enable them in a way that meets you know, their security requirements. We like to joke that if you're playing a video game, you know, the head of cybersecurity at some of these banks, you know, they're like the final boss. And it feels like, you know, there are a number of projects that are getting to that point right now.
Touching on this, like on enterprise adoption, what are your thoughts? Like, what is the thoughts of the panel in? So, like, are we seeing? Will we see? And how will we see more widely adoption of DeFi outside of crypto cycles? I think most of it is still very much into early adopters, DeFi teachings, kind of. What will be the change, or will there be a change from your point of view?
I mean, if you look at just the Polkadot ecosystem, really this tokenization of real world assets, there are a number of different parachains that are focusing on different aspects of that, right? Whether it's you know, the water protocol, you see some of the partnerships that a Star are doing, for example. And I think that when you see this bridge between sort of the more traditional finance or traditional world coming on chain, so to speak, that really seems to be the key, is the tokenization of real world assets. And what's great is that, you know, there's a complementary component to it, right? Because sure, you might have carbon credits or agricultural commodities or potentially some sort of automobile use case that's driving any one particular business. The fact that you have multiple corporations or large enterprises that are looking to come on chain, what ends up happening is all their non-functional requirements end up being fed into the platform. So there's a benefit sort of across the entire ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have a bit of a contrarian view there. I think that real world assets are very hard because the thing that makes DeFi really simple, or not simple, but really, you know, transparent and easy to use is that there are these little tiny computer programs that make decisions very rapidly, right? Can a swap take place, or is this loan healthy or underwater, right? And so by turning that over to really small bits of autonomous computer code, you kind of remove this human element from all the challenges that exist with humans in the real world. And you make it super simple for like this autonomous world computer to kind of make these decisions really rapidly without human biases. And once you move into the real world asset space, I think it becomes incredibly hard because now you have to deal with humans. You know, for example, if you want to, like, let's say you want to tokenize a mortgage or something like that, or use a mortgage as collateral on the blockchain. Well, now you have to rely on, you know, humans to go out and appraise the value of that mortgage, and, you know, what is it really worth? And there might be delays, weeks or months. And so I think it just becomes really challenging. Where I see like us going kind of in terms of connectivity to the traditional financial system, it's going to be challenging and it's going to be an uphill battle, especially given all the you know, high profile collapses like FTX last year. It's really caused a lot of damage in, you know, the minds of regulators and in politicians across the world, because even though, you know, those of us in the industry kind of know that that's a centralized entity that failed, it's sort of the opposite of DeFi, but for most of the general public, they just see crypto and they don't understand the nuance or the difference there. But I do see some clarity coming. You know, I do see like a light at the end of the tunnel with some of the clarity coming from like the SEC in the US. For example, they're now actually providing clarity on like who can be a crypto custodian, even though the rules may be very restrictive. It's actually maybe the clarity that banks and other financial institutions need to understand what the rules are, because up until now, nobody has at the SEC and other large regulators have even been able to tell us what the rules are. And so just knowing what the rules are and having clarity, I think will help the traditional finance players move in.
So you see it actually more positive, at least net neutral positive, in the sense of regulators coming in and giving some setting some regulations and some advices in that sense.
Perhaps.
For
I
adoption.
mean, I think it's challenging because there's a whole bunch of offshore exchanges that may, you know, just not be able to do business in this new world, or maybe like just pushed further to the fringes. And it's hard because, you know, I don't like to see all these restrictive regulation, but having some clarity is better than nothing at all.
Nice, yeah. Any other thought for crypto-wide or outside of crypto cycles adoption of DeFi?
Yeah, no, I agree with Luke.
I mean, I think we're.
Uh,
Please go ahead.
yeah, so I agree with Luke because I was sort of like, as in, I spent 3 years in the Middle East focused on asset tokenization, and one main takeaway was the regulatory and stuff which we had to do, right, which was basically against sort of like what the philosophy, or basically why we're here in DeFi, right? So I think looking at things on a very practical level, regulatory requirements are very heavy for the asset tokenization, and number two is that the regulatory frameworks across the world right now is very sort of like very I mean suspicious at this point of time, and you know, although a lot of jurisdictions have already sort of like created really good regulatory frameworks that allows for experimentation, just like in Singapore, you know, they're exploring with blockchain technology, a lot of other onshore jurisdictions. So but it takes a lot of time, right? And obviously this is one of the blockers for institutional adoption on DeFi. But where you see sort of like, you know, increase where you would see increase institutional sort of like participation or adoption is where you see sort of like the payment rails going up, or the infrastructure across DeFi that if more established, then it would be more ready. It would be, I mean, institutions would be more ready to sort of like jump in and sort of like do what they do in TradFi on DeFi, right? Right now, as in it's quite limited in a sense, and therefore that's sort of like inhibit institutional sort of like adoption. You know, not just focused on the regulatory aspect.
I think just when it comes to institutional adoption in DeFi, I mean, institutional adoption can mean anything, right? But I mean, I don't see this whole tokenization narrative playing out, giving access to all these great assets, which you wouldn't be able to access through the traditional financial system. But I think it's the other way around in this market cycle, actually, where we see that TradFi assets are possibly interesting for DeFi when there's not a lot of yield to be generated. So if you get a gazillion APY for lending USDCs, nobody's really interested in, I guess, 8% you might receive for some high yield bonds. But I think this is exactly the case, and we see this. And when there's an incentive for an institutional player, so to say, whatever is that, to issue a bond and pay 6% to make a DAI to get a loan against that, and he might have collateral and receives in the real world 8 to 9%. That's a great deal for them, and 100 million additional collateral for Maker and yield is also good. And I think now we have the problem. Okay, what Luke addressed, okay, this is not very transparent. What are these loans actually? But I think it will pull other like market makers and other institutions from that space who have a pretty good understanding of how much is something worth. And we'll just have, I think, different liquidation and over collateralization mechanisms where we need to basically test what are others willing to pay right now for these loans through different mechanisms. So I think I'm pretty optimistic if we're moving into this sideways market for a longer time, we'll see actually quite some adoption from exactly these players.
Yeah, amazing. And that's very cool. I think a lot of stuff is happening when it comes to cross-chain DeFi, and like what all of you said, I think as a summary from today's roundtable and from the discussion is like we're finally on the edge of truly cross-chain functionalities are coming in place, and a lot of teams are working on. You all work on different amazing implementations and use cases that will most probably come out in this year in 2023. So we will finally see truly cross-chain interoperability use cases that can get accessed for the users. And I'm very optimistic and very curious about seeing what is going to happen this year. We just crossed the hour. I would say one more round to close it up on what is the hopium in the group here. What are you guys most excited for 2023? Like the one thing that you're looking forward that's coming up. And I would say just go the round. Let's start again with Luke, and the same as the introduction was. And then what are you most excited for 2023?
So I'm most excited to see how cross-chain governance evolves and the new DAO tooling and community governance tooling that will be created to kind of enable that future, because it still seems like very early days. It's almost like we're still communicating over dial-up modems. And I think we're about to enter like the broadband era of cross-chain governance. So I'm excited about that.
Nice, definitely. Aziz?
For me, I'm really excited about the concept of like true interoperability, and that is internal within Polkadot via XCM, where assets and information can pass by within parachains. Just like what we're doing, right? Listing assets across from other parachains on Moonbeam, right? So that's one on the XCM side. But obviously, an equally more important part is basically interoperability with other L1s. Other like Ethereum or Avalanche, Polygon. So having the roads, right, allows us to have like two-sided interoperability that allows for assets to pass by very easily, and a user experience finally in DeFi where users are network agnostic, right? So I think we're really excited about that. We've already launched cross-chain swaps that facilitates capital inflows between L1s, Ethereum to Polkadot and vice versa, or any other change to Polkadot, and internally, XCM. So I think harnessing that, I think, is something that we're really excited for to sort of like unlock huge use cases.
Amazing, yeah. Paul, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we're kind of lucky being in this bearish market because there's really nobody's rewarded for shipping something fast. So you basically really need to like build on something complex, which takes some time. You can release at a later point in time. So I'm quite excited and seeing this. Obviously, as an Oracle, we kind of have the privilege to understand early what other dApps are working on. And I think we'll see in the, next 6 or it'll be 12 months, really, there's always like 1.0, 2.0, but I think I see a lot of things being built, which I think is fair to say is really like a new, it's definitely more than the move from DeFi 1.0 to 2.0. So using cross-chain primitives and other exciting stuff like base technologies like ZK, I think will really move to different toolings being utilized and delivering much more interesting applications.
A lot of firsts. We'll see a lot of firsts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely. What about you, Harrison? Closing words.
Yeah, I would just say, as a result of these new cross-chain liquidity infrastructures and just multi-network infrastructures that meet enterprise requirements around fault tolerance and resilience, I think that will be a precursor to us seeing a lot more enterprise activity this year.
Nice. Well, very cool. Yeah, I mean, super optimistic, as I said before. I think we covered a lot of different topics, and also like not just in the width, also in depth. I think it was a very exciting discussion with a lot of insights from all of you. I say thank you again for the time. It was a pleasure to be here with you and discuss this. And I'm definitely looking forward for what is to come for this year. I'm very excited. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.